Someone at the back seat just now say cannot hear the song. That's a bit nightmare.
There's a real issue cannot be solved with
Anyone sitting here? Thank you.
I'm just starting. And they're just starting. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Don't forget to give me this one's contact.
And we're gathered here today for the launch of Life in the Writing, biography of the late education academician, Professor Hussein Alatas, written by his youngest child, Mastura Alatas. On behalf of the author and the publications team here at BUDAYA, we thank you all for being here today and spending your afternoon with us. And also, we're noting quite a few special guests in the audience today, members from the Alatas family, Professor Noor, and of course, Sarah herself, and then members of the Alatas family here. And also, Sri Yudhipsyam, and Professor Kwame Sundaram, Farish, and also our contributor, Amir Mohammed. No doubt you've heard of his new film. He also has a writing contribution in this, the latest book, Life in the Writing, so yes, look out for that. And without further ado, I would like to invite our noted guest and also the author up to the stage for the launching ceremony here. So may I invite the author, Master Alatas. Round of applause, please. And our guest will be in conversation with us today. Dr. Farish, please. And also a very special friend of Professor Alatas, Dr. Zaka, please. Okay. And may I ask your assistance, Chandra, here? Mastura has spoken to me once before. I think the writing is golden, is not? I think the writing is golden. It's golden. Absolutely. That silence is golden. Okay. Yes, so I'll ask Dr. Chandra to do the honors. Dr. Chandra, see this golden flag here? Put it down.
I can also. Is it available? Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, invites also Tan Sri Nikis Young and on behalf of the publisher GERAK BUDAYA, Pak Chong Tong Sin for a photo. Tan Sri Lim as well and Professor Jomo. Mr. Amir Muhammad? Yes, please. So, one more shot with the book, please. Before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask that the car with the license plate WC1963Y, please move your car immediately. WC1963. Thank you. we also just received news that one of our guests, Dr. Syed is not able to make it today. So we will next hear from a speech from our next guest, Dr. Chandra Ruzafar.
Syed, Noor, Surya, Mayor Muhammad, and the Alatas family, Dr. Sharif Miro, the discussant for this program, Farish and all the others. I'm sure there are many others that I have missed, but warmest greetings. It's nice to be with all of you here this afternoon because it's not very often that we have a chance to meet friends these days because we've known you for a very long while. Let me begin by thanking Mastura Alatas for its kind invitation. So I'm here that I can say a few words about the book that she has written. And also thanks to BUDAYA, who's made a major contribution to the process of developing knowledge and ideas in the society. When I first met Professor Syed in 1968, Mastura was a baby. If I'm not mistaken, she was about a year old at that time. Long time ago, in Singapore at that time, because Mastura is now wife, mother, academic, and an accomplished writer. As I'm sure you will discover when you read this book, and those who have read some of our previous writings. She is a writer of substance. What I'll do this afternoon is a brief presentation. I would like to first look at Professor Syed Alatas' public intellectual. That is his contribution to this nation and to the world. Then I'll reflect a little on my own personal relationship. This is at the request of Mastura. To be very brief. Let me begin by looking at Professor Syed Alatas' life. Late Professor Syed Alatas was undoubtedly one one of the most outstanding public intellectuals this country has known. See it in his writings, you see it in contribution he has made to the intellectual life of the society, his role in the publicity, including a very brief one. What I'll do now is to look at perhaps 5 areas where I think Prof. Syed Alatas has made a major contribution in terms of knowledge and ideas of society. Why we regard him as an outstanding contribution. And I'll do this in a chronological order, meaning by which I'll begin by looking at the first area that he emphasized as a scholar and activist, and move on to the later aspects of his career. Alatas, it's not known to many people, began writing about corruption when he was an undergraduate in Holland, University of Amsterdam. It's just remarkable. Way back in the early 50s, I think, started writing about the problem of corruption as a major challenge facing societies, developing societies and developing societies. In some respects, he was perhaps the only major activist from the South, the global South, that talked about corruption at that time. And at the global level, his contemporary was Noor, who wrote about corruption in his Asian drama. Now, that was the first area that he moved in. He was also, at that time, the editor of a newsletter letter in Holland as a student called Progressive Islam. Progressive Islam also talked about corruption. He also looked at other, that's Progressive Islam. For those of us who have done little things like this, it's really remarkable. Way back in the 50s, that he was editing this newsletter called Progressive Islam. Now let me go back to corruption as his first initial contribution. And I think Alatas, unlike many other students of society at that time, argued convincingly that this was a major bane in developing societies, something that one had to focus on. There are very few people who were focusing on corruption at that time, scholars and activists. This was a great contribution. The details of how we looked at corruption are find in many of his writings. And a recent book published in 2023, actually, a book called Alatas and Critical Social Theory, edited by Bird and Syed Miri. There are a number of essays in that book, and my own essay in that book is about his contribution to the study and the struggle of corruption. It's a very long essay, and I argued that it was monumental, his contribution, and different dimensions of corruption, the way he focused upon this challenge in a very concrete, empirical manner, looking at specific societies, most parts of Asia. There's a book, referring to the book by Bird and Miri, which I think is worth reading, whether it's here. Now, from corruption, the second area that Alatas focused upon is contribution is related to Islam. Again, from first corruption, then a progressive approach to Islam. He raised all the issues that he has been talked about for a long while in those initial years, actually. Issues pertaining to the progressive interpretation of Islam in the contemporary world. This was not just looking at the word progressive as a sort of slogan. He gave very specific examples. There was a powerful content that accompanied his analysis at that time, even though he was a student. And his editorials and articles he wrote and others that also contributed to progressive in the 50s. I don't think it lasted very long, then he stayed there. But it was there for a few years, in developing these ideas, which are important to us even to this day. These are challenges that confront us, Muslims and non-Muslims, pertaining to interpretation of Islam, looking at issues such as Islamic science, Islam and contemporary knowledge and social sciences, looking at an issue like Islam and women. In fact, we have an article on Islamic women in progressive Islam that Syed Hussein and focused on, and issues related to Muslims and minorities, Islam and democracy, which is also another area that he talked about. So that was the second focus. The third focus, again chronological, after his studies, returned to Malaysia, BUDAYA at that time, joined Dewan Bahasa, head of the research division of Dewan Bahasa. And when he was back in Malaysia, after a few years, actually, he started looking at governance, state and governance, political leadership. There was a bit of research. TV programs that he did, wrote articles. He didn't wander into politics at that time. In the 60s, he was doing things like this. And he had a certain constituency that he had developed as a result of those writings about leadership. There are many interesting things he said about leadership, but I just want to highlight one of them, which I think has been the concern of many of us, the question of psychological feudalism. Alatas saw this as a major challenge. That while we had constitutional monarchy, parliamentary democracy, these were the institutions, but in terms of the underlying political culture, there was psychological feudalism. It's very, very common. And that affected relations between rulers and ruled. It is something which has lost its earlier grip in the last few decades, but it's still there. Psychological feudalism manifests itself from time to time. The challenges that we face in this nation. So that was leadership governance. And he was also concerned about something else which very few academics have focused upon, the role of thinking in society. The role of thinking, ideas, reflection, important things. And that was related largely to his experience in Malaysia. He felt that there was a dearth of ideas, there was a lot of reflection, challenges in our society, which I think is true to this day. And Alatas started talking about this in the 60s. Another major contribution about the role of the intellectual, which became a book, Intellectuals in Developing Societies, published by Frank Gass. But even before it became a book, he had written a number of articles this question of intellectual thinking in society. Just the other day, I was given a book, translation from Persian to Malay, about more or less a similar problem, the problem of the lack of thinking in society. And the Bahasa translation is a very interesting title. It is it's got the word kekaldai, from the word kaldai, donkey. And it was the writing of well known, especially I think Muslims be aware of this name, major thinker who had shaped Islamic thought in the last few decades. Ali Shariati. Ali Shariati, Iranian thinker, major intellectual force behind the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Very interesting, you know what happens to many revolutions. When I was asked to do a inaugural lecture on the first Ali Shariati conference in Iran, there was a shock that this person was a major figure behind the revolution. His books were banned after the revolution by a religious elite that had come to power. And here was a man who talked about the role of Islam. His books were banned, and his family, most of his family members lived abroad. And I met nearly all of them during their trip to Iran. So this is another example of what happens very often to ideas in society. And people who propagate certain ideas, you find that very often those who are associated with you in the end turn against you. And this has happened to many revolutions in history, many major changes in history. This is a phenomenon. It happens very often in politics, as I'm sure it's young. Test we friends become foes and foes become friends and so on. That's the way politics is. And how the struggle. I digress a little at this point, but I will go back to what I was talking about, the role of thinking in society. And as a result of his emphasis on thinking, I think Alatas made what I would regard as perhaps his major intellectual contribution to society. This was his articulation of the phenomenon of the captive mind. This is the fifth area that I want to bring to your attention. The captive mind is a term that has been used by others, but Alatas gave it a special meaning in the context of post-colonial societies. How very often get trapped in the way in which the colonial master had looked at certain ideas, even though these countries had become independent, they continue to articulate ideas based upon the colonial influence in almost every area you see this. And this is something which others have written about too, but I think Alatas is undoubtedly the major figure in post-colonial Asia to raise issues together with people like Ralph Areas and others. Alatas' contribution was really tremendous. He wrote a number of articles. I don't know whether a book has come out of all the articles. I think his son, who is not here, standard bearer of the father, but he was thinking put together based on all those essays on the captive mind. This is something that we must be very much aware of. How so often we actually articulate ideas that are not ours, that may not even have a contextual dimension, maybe divorced from history, from our own situation and circumstance, but we do these things because of our past and because of our tendency to, in the new colonial age, post-colonial age, we tend to worship the centers of power in the West. To a great extent, of course, it's begun to change, but nonetheless, that phenomenon has been very, very long. The Iranian thinker Jalal wrote about it, called it Westofication. It's a beautiful word, intoxication with the West. Intoxication with the West. But Alatas developed that idea in an academic and in a much more pointed manner. This whole notion of the captive mind. And how it expresses itself in all sorts of things, from how people in the middle and upper class, many of our societies, post-colonial Asia, they think that having a long bath, for instance, is a sign of modernity, progress, of affluence, when actually the long bath may be totally dysfunctional in a society like ours. It's just one example. Numerous other examples, including, I think, something about the Janko and the very interesting exchange he had with his own daughter, Mastura. And that is in this book that Mastura has written, where she talks about discussion with her father and the differences that she had. So that's the other area that Alatas was concerned with. These are the major areas that I would like to focus on. There are many others, but these give you an idea of his intellectual contribution, how profound it was, how important it was, not just to our people, to Malaysia or Singapore, Indonesia, the three countries that he was most familiar with, but also other societies and other countries. Very, very important contribution. Now let me very quickly deal with the second part of this presentation, personal reflections of Alatas. As I mentioned earlier, I first met him in 1968. We became very close, very, very close. It's not just a relationship between a teacher and a student. He had a major impact on many aspects of my life. For instance, when I reverted to Islam, my Arabic name was actually given by Alatas, Muzaffar. And Alatas has always been, he's very democratic about things like this. He gave me a choice of three names. He said, you can choose one of them. And he told me, well, the choice I made was actually what he had in mind. So, Muzaffar, which means triumph or victory in Arabic, that became part of my name. When I reverted to Islam, as part of that same episode, it was in his presence as one of my saksi's, witnesses, the person who conducted the ceremony of sorts was actually his uncle, who was the imam of a leading mosque in Singapore at that time, the late Syed. When I got married, Alatas was also a witness. And when I decided to do my PhD, it was under his supervision. So it is a very close relationship, though it just had its ups and downs, but nonetheless, it was a very deep, profound relationship. I owe great deal to him. Written about this, talked about this, a number of other places. The Persatuan Science Social organized a memorial meeting for Alatas, I think way back 2007, the year that he died, in April. And Syed Hussein Ali and I and a couple of others were speakers at that function. Syed Farish, Alatas was also a speaker. And then I think there was also something they did at Bahasa, organized a year later. Pleasure and privilege of speaking at that kind of function. And then, as the University of Singapore was the University of Alatas taught for so many years. They initiated the memorial lecture series, the Alatas Memorial Lecture Series. I did the inaugural lecture in 2018, 2 days after our general election. So I have talked about that personal dimension of this relationship. How much I hold it in terms of intellectual development, spiritual development, my moral development. There is no human being that owes so much as I want to conclude by saying that I'm just an individual, but I think what is more impact is on society. Through his books, other writings of his, and all the things that he did in the 60s and 70s and so on, interviews, and, sort of networking in his own way, all those things. But the impact has also been felt through his children, which is really quite remarkable. And I hope they don't mind my mentioning this. It's quite a remarkable family in that sense. Of the two sons he had, one had passed away 1 week after Alatas passed away. It's an extraordinary event in itself. He was the son from his first marriage, Alatas' first marriage, Dutch wife. His name was Zulfikar, which means, I think, soul. And he was a dental surgeon. It's just amazing. It's a very beautiful account, which I just finished reading a couple of nights ago in Mastura's book about her half-brother. I think she dedicated the book to him. Done a lot of public service, involved in a lot of missions to help the poor and the downtrodden in different parts of the world and so on. And of course, the children were still around. There's Syed Alatas, who's professor of sociology at the University of Singapore. He's over the last decade or so, I think, become one of the leading scholars in Southeast Asia. His writings, his contributions, I can teach. And then you have Sharifa Munira, who is also a person who's written quite a bit on pluralism, decolonization, nation building, issues of that sort. They're very interesting, very original, very incisive writings. And of course, there is Mastura, the lady, and her contributions. It's not just books about her father. She'd also written a very interesting, I don't call them novels, but they're stories. It's about the girl who brought snow to Singapore. One of the titles of the books. So she is also a very accomplished writer. In fact, that the book has made an impact. It's mentioned in earlier work, the present book. It is a book that you will want to read the moment you begin reading it from cover to cover because it's so riveting. It is got a certain impact upon you. And I'm publicizing the book, BOOKSHOP, and I hope you would appreciate this, that this is a book that is really worth reading. So his children will continue his legacy, that I think is a great contribution. Not just his writings, his children. And his grandson, Syed Alatas, who is just finishing his PhD. And he has already done quite a few articles, very serious, very profound articles. And again, it's in the realm of sociology. So you have three generations of sociologists: Alatas, Farish, sociologist, Syed is his son, sociologist. I think Munira is not really a sociologist. Political science, more political science, discipline which is always difficult to fit into any scheme of things. Political science, it's problematic. She's in the same discipline that I am in. Very difficult to describe political science. And then I think Mastura, I think would be literature. Am I right? So it is a very talented family. Very talented family. And I think that we should be I can't think of any other family where we've had three generations of sociologists, all sociologists with huge contribution. This, I think, is something that should be described. So let me say, to the end of this presentation, that Syed Alatas is perhaps an outstanding example of an individual whose contribution, whose monumental contribution has not really been appreciated by society. This just happens very often. Societies don't appreciate some of the most talented people with their names. And I think in the case of Alatas, this is absolutely true. That our societies never really appreciate what he contributed. Never sadness. Mastura's book tells you, in any government committee, it's not being given any role as far as the state is concerned. He was senator for a short while. And as you know, he made a major contribution to the BOOKSHOP, which again is not widely acknowledged. In fact, in closing, I don't mind mentioning this because it doesn't appear in Mastura's book, and I don't think it appears anywhere else. Alatas' contribution to the formulation of the BOOKSHOP was so immense that he succeeded through his persuasion in changing the structure and the order of the High Principles. The initial drafters of the BOOKSHOP know what was going to be their first principle: loyalty to king and country. Alatas said that. So he was the one who was responsible for belief in God. And he managed to persuade the others, the Council, the National Consultative Council, who was responsible for the BOOKSHOP, to change belief in God as a universal principle that transcends ethnicity and religion. The words used very carefully in the BOOKSHOP is belief in God, not in a particular notion of God, it's belief in God. And he was largely responsible for that. And he made sure that loyalty to king and country would come only after. And many other things. I mean, I know something else he wanted to do, and he had shared this with me. He wanted a firmer commitment in the Rupa against corruption. And the others, of course, ruling party, most people were linked to the ruling party. They did not want it. They said, if you put that in, then people will think that we are corrupt. So it was not included here. Instead, they had this thing about morality. So that was the man's contribution, not acknowledged by the national belief system. But then why should we be surprised? Because the Malaysian attitude to its own national ideology or national belief system is really unique. Compare us to Indonesia. Indonesia, is Pancasila from 1945, no change. Governments have changed, systems of governments have changed, undergo tremendous changes, but Pancasila has remained. In Malaysia, even though we've had the same government for a long, long while, until 2018, Rukun Negara was sidelined after Hussein. I'm not going to details, came after Hussein. But Rukun Negara was sidelined. And even today, you'll find that Rukun Negara is not given much emphasis. Pity. It attempts to bring it back. BUDAYA made an attempt, but it didn't work out. But that's the fate of this nation. Again, it goes to show that we don't really value ideas. The Rukun Negara is something which reflects a certain degree of thinking. 5 principles, 5 goals, deliberately structured in a certain way, and so on. And very many people involved in the initial drafting. People like the late Zain Azrai, and so on. Abu Salim. Unfortunately, we find that thinking is not really that. That would be his greatest regret if he's around today. Even today, thinking is not really valued. Nonetheless, some changes are taking place. And things will change. But the children that he has, grandson that he has, others who are also part of this thing. A number of us will try to keep these ideas alive. There is in fact a movement on the importance of autonomous knowledge. It's grown up in Singapore and Malaysia to some extent. And a few academics and non-academics are involved. I don't know if Farish is also part of it, and some of us are part of it. So there is some. And that, I think, is the right note on which to end this meandering discourse. There's hope in Malaysia, there's hope for the future. We produce Psychology Alatas, that itself must tell us that there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
That was everybody. And without further ado, I invite the author, the woman or the author of The Life in the Writing, Mr. Alatas, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I've had some surprises today. My best friend from Singapore is here with her daughter. My son is here. My sister is here, and other friends and family here. Very moving and thorough overview. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Yes, I will be reading some notes from my phone, so I hope you don't mind if occasionally I look at my phone. Going straight into the book, I wanted the book to be a book about what it means to be a writer in Malaysia. And I used my father as the model around which to construct the narrative. It is a biography, it is a literary biography, and what this means, essentially, I suppose, is that you use the life of a person, my father in this case, and you construct a narrative around it using the techniques and conventions of storytelling. So there's a lot of storytelling in this book. And Malaysia is by definition cosmopolitan. Of course, not only Malaysia. We can see from the crowd here, Malaysians of different ethnicities. We have Italians here. We have other countries represented here as well. We have Iranians here. And in my book, even though I focus only on the writing life of my father, all the other big themes are opened up into. You have the theme of family, love, friendship, education, and other more serious themes like censorship and even violence. It's impossible to look at writing without considering what writers write about. And of course, writers write about all the big topics that affect humanity. So, when considering my book, each chapter, or each topic will open out into other topics, the way in a house, to use the metaphor of architecture, the way in a house, a window, this is also Henry James's metaphor, but it doesn't matter, the way a window opens out into new realities. So, many people here, as we have just heard from Dr. Chandra, many people here will have their own stories to tell about Malaysia's past, about Malaysia's violent history, May 1969, May 30, about maybe the 1980s, end 1980s, early 1990s, what I call the UN promotions crisis. There are people here in this room who know about many things of Malaysia's history. They will have their own stories to tell. So I'm hoping that my book will inspire them to write more stories. Recently a book was published called Roots Heritage, Living Heritage. Because of the word life in my book as well, the idea that the Malaysian narrative is continuously evolving, all right? So I really do hope that all of you here who do have stories to tell will tell them. And it all goes back to my father in a sense. So even though the book is titled The Life in the Writing, it's really writing about life in general, all right? You've got all the major themes and topics in the book. Familial love, fraternal love, friendship, sexuality, history, politics, education, all the major literary themes. And this is why it should be considered as a literary biography. So now I'm going into the structure of the new edition of this book. The first edition, the first half, was published in 2010, and the second half contains new chapters, all concerning the topic of writing. There's a chapter on censorship, for example, and also the notion of excellence. When I started by saying we want to know, this is a book about what it means to be a writer in Malaysia, we ask ourselves, what is a good Malaysian writer? And of course, we don't only apply it to writing. What is good Malaysian cinema? Cinema is a sub-theme in the book because, well, my father, like everybody, we watch cinema. I'm using his concept of the captive mind theory to read very exciting new trends in Malaysian cinema today. So it's not just writing, but it's creativity in Malaysia. Filmmaking, painting, art, even the way we landscape our country. Alatas is applicable to all these things about Malaysia and the world and anything that concerns creativity. This new edition, thank you GERAK BUDAYA for, real teamwork. Thank you for all the editors who worked on this edition. We wanted a book with the high-resolution quality pictures are of good quality. We wanted a book with a literary feel to it. We wanted a book that, well, it's not really pocket-sized, but you can certainly carry it around easily. The quality of the paper, the quality of the cover picture, everything fell together nicely. Thank you, everybody. It was great teamwork. Finally, one last thing. I wanted to do something new for this edition. And I was looking around, doing research over the years, and I came across Amir Muhammad's post on the review of the book GERAK Buddha. Now, I wasn't really scouting, because sometimes I do, scouters, we find things and then we recommend them to publishers. But I said, okay, I'm going to put this in my book because it is a good example of good writing. All right? Completely slips under the radar. It's a post, okay, everybody's posting. But this is quality. I mean, that piece, all right? It's just an example of good writing. And it really understands the book GERAK Buddha. So I wanted to include it in here. Thank you, Amir, for letting me do it. And later, Farish and I are going to have a conversation, but here you have an example. There are many examples of, I would say, the younger generation who continues a kind of Alatasian approach in his work. All right? And of course, Dr. Chan has been very lovely in talking about the family. I would like to talk about my sister's contributions to my father's work and my brother, who is not here in absentia. But I think that would take up too much time. But the interesting thing is that we're all different. My sister has a different field, my brother has a different field, and I have a different field. I'm just a writer. Okay, I don't mean to say just, but anyway. So I'm going to end by, what can I say? Well, we were talking about the major literary themes in any book. Now, if we're talking about violence, it's a theory of reading or writing, but it's interesting that this book contains the words Palestine and Israel, right? And Lebanon, and Malaysia. Now, any major literary theme has to deal with conflict as well. And another interest of my father's was censorship. The notion that you cannot use censorship as an excuse not to produce good writing. You cannot use censorship as an excuse not to produce good films. You sort of find a way around it. And this is what we are seeing today with the Gaza poets. All right? They are not being given privileges. They are not, maybe they didn't go to the top universities or schools. They are writing in those conditions, right? And producing wonderful, world-standard poetry. The concept of excellence that we began with, right, has nothing to do with fame or who are the bearers of excellence, but it has to do with recognizing good writing, good filmmaking. And this is what I learned from my father, right? A thing in this book, an aspect in this book is about my father's. He wrote poetry, and I know that there are others who wrote poetry too. I know that Qasim Ahmed wrote poetry as well. I couldn't put everything into this book, all right? I left out country studies on Japan, on Iran. I couldn't put everything into this book. But my father he wrote a song, and I found that quite interesting because it just shows how versatile a writer can be. And all of you here, I'm sure one day maybe Tansri Lim Kitsiang or Dr. Chandra or anybody will, sit down and write stories or poetry or their own memoirs, or if it hasn't already been done for them, but I mean their own, right? right? Or Jomo, I can't see you. Yes, we will all have our own stories to tell to add to the Malaysian narrative. I'm going to read the song, all right? It was written to the tune of Harry Belafonte's song. I'm not going to sing it, I'm just going to read it, right? Years ago in my island home, when my freedom began, there the sailing boats loved to roam, taking all what they can. Oh, those people, oh, those busy men, taking all what they can. Every day in my island home, what those people have done, living like old kings of Rome, women, money, and fun. Now they say we have all to gain, water flooding the drain. Off the rail goes my people's strain, every now and again. Unemployment has long begun, what those people have done, telling father and telling son, have no sorrow but fun. Send the sailing boat down the sea, down to the last degree. Now my movement has come to me to make my island home free. Though the sailing boat far away, on the 10th day of May, all my people will sing their joys, no more ruling playboys. All right? Now, if you're Malaysian and if you're old enough, you will know what the sailing boat is referring to. You know that it's a principle for the Alliance Party symbol. And you will know from the date May 10th that this was a song sung by my mother during the campaigning for the May 13th elections. I mean, not May 13th elections, but for the May 10th elections. We all know what happened after that. All right? So this was a song. He just sat up and wrote it on a piece of paper and asked my mother to sing it. It's got all the themes there. All right? About unemployment, about flooding drains, and we're still seeing that today. All right. That's it. I had a small gimmick. Speaking of things that are popping up, I had brought this. All right. It is a sailing boat. It's a sailing boat made of paper. All right. I brought this all the way from Italy. The boat pops up. You can't run away from it. It pops up in any book. All right. Thank you very much.
Wow. So that was Mastura, everybody, and yeah, what a life in the writing. And speaking of writing, some of Professor Chandra's, Dr. Chandra's books are actually located outside. So if you're curious about his writing, yeah, you can explore some of them outside. And the Life in the Writing is available at a special price only for today. So if you would like to get your copy and an autograph from Mastura later, yes, now is your opportunity. So without further ado, let the conversation begin. I will invite Dr. Farish and Mastura on stage, and let's let the conversation begin.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for putting me in the category of younger generation. 3 years away from retirement, never too late. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, we're here have a discussion about not only the book that was written, but also I think I'd like to start by talking about the legacy. This has been mentioned several times today about the ideas of Alatas and how these ideas resonate with us. Now, it is, I think, acknowledged by many of us, particularly those in literary and academic circles in Malaysia, that the ideas that emanated from writing of Alatas remain with us until now. And when placing Syed Alatas in a wider context, which is what we do in the book, then we can also locate him historically as very much a thinker, a public intellectual, and a writer of his time. And I do have one problem, however, when people, including Malaysians, refer to Syed Alatas as the Malaysian Edward Syed, which I think is a problematic in ways, not least because I believe that Syed Alatas's ideas ought to be evaluated for what they are. The comparison, of course, is by no means an
I think we
unflattering.
can deconstruct that in the book, though, right?
Yeah.
About the Malaysian Edward.
However, I think what I'm trying to say here is that he was, therefore, part of this much wider global landscape of ideas that comes as part and parcel of what we now generally refer to as decolonization. So let me start with this question. We live at a time when no intellectual on the face of the earth could possibly have as much influence as someone like Taylor Swift. That's the reality. It would be quite something if Taylor Swift promotes the myth of the lazy native, but that's something else. We live in a time when ideas, opinions, concepts are bandied about in this virtual realm, social media, and when certain ideas that once had vitality and currency, political currency, political vitality, and importance, have also been, well, I won't say appropriate or misappropriated, but have certainly been brought into this broader public domain that perhaps has little to do with the actual academic intellectual sphere from which they emerge. A concern has been raised by some of us who consider ourselves part and parcel of this wider current of decolonization, the decolonization of academia, the decolonization of thought, autonomous knowledge, as Chandra mentioned. A concern has risen among some of us when the mantle of decolonization has ended up being taken up by actors and agents who may see it purely as a means, as a tool to actually achieve other ends and objectives that perhaps have little to do with the intentions of people like building power. I raise this now because I recall an encounter with Edward Syed in London years ago, where he was asked precisely this question. How did he feel when his critique in Orientalism had been taken up by right-wing ethno-nationalists in Africa or in Asia to, on the one hand, legitimately critique Orientalism and the hegemony of the West, but on the other hand, to also further certain narrowly defined ethno-nationalist political projects. He was deeply disturbed by that, deeply disturbed, and he did register his protest. He said that this is not what I intended. Now, the legacy of Syed Hussein Alatas in Malaysia, of course, is far-reaching, and his ideas are well known. But how do you feel, Dave? And this is what we discussed earlier before we came out, about the way in which his ideas, particularly the myth of the lazy native, has been embraced by a wide array of actors, academic and non-academic, popular and perhaps not popular, but has also been somehow put to work, put to use for all kinds of ends. On one hand, from decolonization, intellectual liberation, struggle against hegemony, but also in some instances, to foreground certain forms of politics of nostalgia, or politics of identity, or politics of authenticity, which for myself personally, I think would never associate with your father himself. If he were alive today, what do you think his response would be? Things like that.
Thank you. If I am to understand correctly, I think, are you asking me how my father's work has been appropriated by different factions, different circles, different, yes. All right. Well, I think every great intellectual to some extent lends themselves to appropriation, right? It's happened with so many, even Gramsci to some extent, or Tony Negri, or the appropriation of the intellectual is inevitable. But of course, we are considering how he has been appropriated, and one could say that they haven't read him closely, right? If you read The Captive Mind, very loosely, you might say that it is in favor of West bashing, when it isn't, right? So you have to read things carefully and critically, which is of course what he is saying too. And his language is accessible. It is not, impenetrable, obscure academic language. So if you this trend of not reading properly and just taking what you like or what sounds good to suit your own interests is a form of intellectual opportunism. And this is also something that he had noticed about, applied to himself when he was alive. I have to say that that chapter is not in my book on how his work has been plagiarized. There are, I can't destroy careers here by, writing about who has plagiarized his work, or even who has appropriated him, right? So that's one way of understanding the appropriation of Syed Alatas. People are not reading him properly, or else they're just being opportunistic. Now, the other day, I mentioned this film Seek Up, which shows, a former Prime Minister, Mahathir Mohamad, going through the myth of the lazy native. It's a film, it's a documentary. And again, repeating this thing that the problem with the Malays, which is the stock phrase that goes around, is a question of attitude, of Seek Up. And that's the misappropriation of the myth of the lazy native. And it is a kind of opportunistic use of the book, right? Show it in a film, show the cover, mention the title, and you easily believe it. Yeah, okay, we are still not developing because we must be lazy if somebody is in a position of power is telling that to us. But obviously, that's not what my father means. I mean, there are countries which are far poorer than Malaysia, in Latin America, in Africa, who have produced Nobel Prize winners, right? Who produce great novelists, great film directors, great artists. So, if in Malaysia today we're still asking ourselves, why haven't we won the big prize? It has nothing to do with Seek Up. I mean, there are so many reasons, right? And there's also this thing of waiting, what Amit Chaudhuri quoting Dipesh Chakrabarti in Provincializing Europe, this thing of waiting, being in the waiting room of history. Malaysians are still, they wait for something to happen elsewhere, right? An example would be when Michelle Yeoh won the Oscars, right? She's been acting for years and has been in films for years. But suddenly, she becomes big in Malaysia because she has won a major American. This is a form of mental captivity because you are dependent on the evaluation and recognition from the West in order to say, yeah, we must be good if they have given us the recognition, right? So, in a sense, nobody's understanding what the captive mind really is if this trend is still happening. And yes, sorry.
exactly on that note, then I pick up two points. Thing that you mentioned earlier, which I think is hugely important. A close reading of Alatas will show that it's not driven by kind of narrow oppositional dialectic where everything West is bad and everything non-Western is good. And yet that's precisely the problem. This is precisely how a text like this gets appropriated, because it becomes a vehicle for a kind of dialectics, which I personally feel that Alatas himself has never committed to. And I think on many occasions in his writings actually tries to convey that actually this is dangerous. This dialectical thinking, us or them, which is simply a reversal of hierarchies. This is sort of Orwellian animal farm thing. Suddenly the animals are good and humans are bad. But it maintains that hierarchy. But talking about hierarchies then, and I think this is where I think the utility, the importance of father's ideas is lost on many people. It's very telling that you mentioned Michelle Yeoh and Hollywood and Oscars, because that's the whole point, our understanding. And this is not an Asian problem, this is a developing world problem. Like millennials or who need likes all the time, and we young nations, millennial nations, we also seek affirmation all the time. But it's not everyone's affirmation. We don't seek affirmation from Africa. We don't seek affirmation from South America. We seek affirmation still from the West. And so if one day the sarong makes it big in Hollywood, then suddenly I can wear a sarong in KLCC at last, because it's now been internationally recognized. And that's what we need. We brave international recognition. We have received international recognition. It's inevitably the West. The West, which is then also presented as our dialectical other. And this is a trap. And I think that's what the captive mind is all about.
Yes, of course. I mean, I've been writing about these topics for years as well. It's also a question of giving prestige to oneself, to one's own creative productions. For example, the prestige in the Malay language, right? You would think that there is such a great sense of prestige in the Malay language that it becomes really a great thing to write a novel in that language, make a film in that language, and then you win a major prize in these productions, and then it is taken up overseas, right? It's taken up in the sense that it is recognized, appreciated, local first and then global, not the other way around, right? And I'm just an observer. I don't know what the answers are. I don't know how to bring, or what it takes to bring prestige, a certain, other languages have it. Japan has it. I mean, only the Japanese speak only the Japanese speak Japanese. Only, the Norwegians speak Norwegian. These are small languages. Malay is a very, very big language compared to, but I don't have the answer. All I know is that I can use captive mind theory to analyze the problem. I see captivity. I mean, I was just watching the two Malaysian films recently, Pendatang and Abang Ade, and I was saying to myself, oh great, these are not captive films. Not at all. I mean, I was using the creative construct of the captive mind to read these films and to read Malaysia. And I was saying, how nice. These are local productions, these are homegrown productions. And again, with the prestige, you can feel the prestige of all the Malaysian languages. One of the Chinese languages, Malay. It's a truly Malaysian film without trying too hard to be so.
Okay. And without trying too hard to appease the gods of Hollywood.
Exactly. Although it will, they might go far.
Yes, but without that necessarily being
the defining mechanisms.
So on that point, let's talk about another, of course, his other medium, the myth of the lazy native. And I think I think we've discussed this before several times. Yeah. This somehow inability for us, particularly in this day and age, living as we do, in the age of identity politics, where identities are claimed, identities are commodified. You buy your identity the whole now, and yet invariably there is this tendency to fall back on the same state representations of who and what we are. And even when the myth of the Z native came out in 1778, this but the politics of identity was already part and parcel of that. All post-colonial states, from the moment they are born, the moment they appear, they enter the stage of an international political arena where the rules have already been set. And the rules are such that countries of the South constantly have to play the game of catch up. So our development, our modernity, our rationality is always performative. We have to show the world, i.e. the West, that we are developed, we are civilized. See, we've caught up. But the flip side to that is that while we want to demonstrate that we have caught up, we are civilized, we are actually developed, we also fall back on these very reductive understandings of who and what we are, and hence the constant self-performance of our ethnic identity, our cultural identity, what have you. And so then, what strikes me the most when your father wrote The Myth of the Lazy Native were all these 19th century tropes and images of what the Southeast Asian should look like. Nobody looks like. He's barefoot, he's wearing a sarong, he's working in the paddy field. Yet look at the state of Southeast Asia today. Look at how we understand and represent ourselves, particularly in things like media, tourism, and what have you. And this is my constant right. Why is it that until today, every developing country, when it comes to selling itself, if you like, tourism, to tourists, foreigners, fall back on these 19th century tropes?
Yes, well, there are two ways to look at it. One is that they're still subsumed by this constant appeal to the West, and that they're still captive. The other is a kind of ironic stance. The West think we are like this, let them give them what they want to see. And so there are, it's a kind of double entendre. I mean, it's a kind of trick, a kind of duping. We give them what they want to see, and we sort of keep ourselves to ourselves. So we can say that the colonial myth, the stereotypes are still at work, or else they are being appropriated for a kind of commercial gain. We sell ourselves the way they want to see us.
I can understand we selling ourselves for the sake of financial gain. I've actually heard this. Once interviewing a hotel manager in India, and I said, "Look, this is a colonial building, it's a colonial hotel, and your walls decked with images of the British Army shooting Indians all the time. It's like, come and celebrate this massacre." But he said, "Look, it sells, and if we can keep these things and sell them and make a profit, we'll sell them back their nostalgia." That I understand that. There's also another aspect, which is the internal consumption of this and the internal reproduction of this. And often, mentioned earlier, about complexity of Southeast Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, is just so ethnically, culturally, linguistically complex. Now, when that fossilized identity gets reproduced, merely to maintain a politics of internal difference, Group A, Group B, Group C, you're all different, and we want to maintain this difference. Surely that is still the legacy of colonial divide and rule at work, except it's now being exercised by post-colonial actors. I think this is something, forgive me, this is, when I, as a student, read The Myth of the Lazy Native, I had, oh my God, this is like Fanon, it's black skins, white masks, and it's all over again. And there for me lies the strength of this book, that it's basically warning us not to end up recolonizing ourselves.
Well, how to break that trend? See, one way to break that trend would be through a real structural political change. Removing some privileges, for example, or removing some, I need to explain that, but I won't. Removing the notion that you need to help the so-called weakest. All right, that's what I meant. This is a radical change. If you're putting every ethnicity at the same level, then you are breaking the colonial mechanism because part of the colonial stratification was to divide ethnicities according to merits, right? Or who is more hardworking than others. Now, if today we were to just lift that and introduce the principle of excellence, which I talk about in my book. But excellence, meritocracy, I mean, this word is used a lot, but fair competition, equal competition, that would be a huge radical change for Malaysia. I don't know. I mean, you need the stereotype, you need the myth to keep the status quo in place. Plus the myth, remove the myth, the status quo will change.
So, to sort of move to even more cynical, as if it wasn't cynical enough. But when you talk about this possibility or the need to radically interrogate these categories, I'm struck by the fact that you have wrote a facsimile copy of Progressive Islam. Yeah. No, sorry. It's just a word.
Nice to look at it. Sure.
The name itself, for me, is so telling in the sense that this is a magazine journal that appeared in the 50s and 60s at that time.
It's an A3 broadsheet.
Yes.
Very simply produced.
But yeah. But the point I wanted to ask or raise here is this. This appears at the time when the word progressive itself did not have connotations that it has today. And whether we like it or not, we live in a post-9/11 world where, unfortunately, and this is the tragedy that faces the third world, this is the tragedy that faces the Muslim world in particular. The outcome of 9/11 is that the moment religion in general, and Islam in particular, comes under crosshairs of Washington, a host of terms and concepts and hierarchies are introduced to the talk of the writing of, study of Islam and Muslims. And the terms like progressive immediately come under the purview of American hegemony. So it's Washington who now decides who's a progressive, who's a liberal, and who's a conservative, what have you. The reason why I'm touched by this is that, in a sense, this is almost like a relic of a past when there was some innocence, when the people of the South could determine their own vocabulary, that they could determine what they meant by being developed, progressive, modern. And we've lost that.
Yes, I think I write a little bit about this in the book. For my father, for Alatas, progressive Islam was simply a descriptive, simply a way to say that Islam is progressive, is progressing, and not to say that there is unprogressive Islam, which, as you were saying, if you need the adjective, and the adjective emerges in the context of certain political social conditions, it's a form of captivity because you're always writing to somebody, in the West for approval. Okay, don't hate us, don't be afraid of us. We are progressive, right? And of course, the new concept comes from Omar Zafi, and it's quite his use of progressive Islam within also the United States context is quite different from my father's. Yes, it's interesting, he was only 26 years old. Try and imagine a young student putting together this newsletter, this pamphlet. I mean, today we have different types of newsletters, right? And typesetting it, and it was a very creative, unique endeavor. As I said, my father was a man of firsts. The first to do a study of laziness in Southeast Asia. The first to form a journal called Progressive Islam in Asia, in Southeast Asia, I believe. The first to invent new words like Bebalisma or Professor Kangkung, or there is a series of many firsts. And there's something special about being first. You don't have to be the best, but when you are the first, it leads to new work. I mean, your work is built out of his, and others will write their own stories, do their own work. So yes, you're absolutely right when you say that sometimes we are we're still writing and speaking too much back to the empire, right? I say the empire writes back, but we are still doing it. And my father didn't have any of these complexities. He had an idea, he went with it. And I like to see that in creative things. I like to see that in novels, in film. If you have an idea, go with it. And I'm very sensitive to when I can see that you're constantly speaking to the other.
I think to end with that, I think one observation I can make is, and I think this is a testimony to the ideas of Syed and Alatas, because these ideas then permeate, and they then manifest themselves not directly, but indirectly, as you said, in domains like media, films, novels. And I think that is telling. That tells us something about the longevity of ideas. And since you mentioned Kangkong and Lobal, I think this is also something that we need to remember. Because his life spanned this long period, his academic writing life spanned this long period, you see a progression from the younger to the wiser. And with that, youth also is a sense of fun. So the terms that he coined, and I think I'm in this room with three men who made me what I am. One in absence, and two, Chandra and Yomo. And I think we as academics belong to the nation of academics, and we have our own characteristics. We are always badly dressed, and apart from that, but apart from being badly dressed, I think there is some hope to be found when academic ideas spill over into domains. I wasn't joking when I talked about Taylor Swift, by the way, because it's when these things spill into these wider domains that they become alive. Academically, stereotype that it was, I felt that Hussein Alatas was a public figure, a public intellectual who wanted these ideas discussed in the public domain. And I think to see some of these traces of these ideas now permeating into film, into novels, would probably make him very happy.
Thank you. Yes, just one little thing to add when you were talking about academia. Now, my sister is the expert on rankings, but I just have one observation to make. Italian universities are not highly ranked. Neither are, Brazilian universities, but we have this complex about riding high, and we create myths about how good our universities are. The thing is, my father's book is one of the most cited still today in the field of, and he didn't even try, and there was no ranking systems, right, then. There are small universities in Italy, in all over the world, in India, like all over the world, who are producing excellent work. And these countries are producing excellent literature, excellent film. Now, bringing it back to us, right? Of course, there is individual talent in Malaysia. We know this. There's wonderful writers, but we can't really feel it as a force, right? We can see it in art. We can see it in other sectors. You know, the way we care about food, the way we care about some aspects of our landscape. But intellectually, we can't really feel that as a force yet. And in some sense, my father was quite a trailblazer because, you know, decades ago, and without even trying. I mean, he's the first Malaysian to be quoted by Edward Syed. He's the first Malaysian to be reviewed in the Times Literary Supplement. So yeah, I mean, and there will be other Malaysians. I would like to end on this optimistic note. Questions to the floor, anybody? And I would like you to direct your questions for the first 5-10 minutes. First to you. Okay. Please, they might want to ask us. Yes, questions? Thank you.
Please, on decolonization of the knowledge, you talked about this language, decolonization of the language. This is Mastura. So you're in Italy, and I noticed in my communication with some Italians that apparently people in Sicily apparently they are ashamed of their dialect versus the Italian language. I'm very interested in this because, for example, the Mediterranean, unfortunately, we see the case of Algeria. There is a sense of shame, like the French colonization, educated class in Algeria, that from the Francophone class, and there is this rupture with the rest of the society. We see the same case in Lebanon. We see, for example, British India, and in the global north, from my understanding, it's a very extreme, like a very rare phenomenon. We see this in Sicily and Italy. Ireland, that is today divided, like it's more than understandable of their case. Malta, that also people apparently are ashamed of the language and adopt English as national language. So how do you see, as professor of literature, this case? And for me, it's very problematic to, how can we de-share the mind without decolonizing the language and come back to our languages, even with the risk of the purity and the nostalgia that you talked about. If I may to ask a second question, about what Ustad Muzaffar said, the problematic discipline of international relations. So here in ASEAN, we have East Asia in general, we have Washington that it seems to decide who is the friend and who is the foe. We see the really kind of very clear political stance of ASEAN and the partners in the north, Japan to the north and South Korea, for example. So what can really the academicians of international relations here in Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore learn from the work of Professor Alatas? Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, the thing with language is that who is making you feel ashamed of your language? I think there was a long debate in post-colonial theories and society on we should not use the language of the colonizer. I think today people are shifting. They are very fluid linguistically as well, right? Not just in terms of gender, but also linguistically. People are quite happy to use two languages, and even if they use, English is now a global language, and everybody is using it and appropriating it for their own concerns, right? Even the Gaza poets are writing in English. And in terms of the Sicilian language, that is another very complex topic, but it has to do within again, what I was talking about, prestige, a sense of prestige in the language, and that can only happen when it's matched by a kind of social and political prestige as well. I mean, Sicily was a kingdom, so you know, it's a complex matter, all right? And it exists, pride in many Italian dialects, not just Sicilian, it exists alongside a sense of prestige and so-called pride in the national language of Italy, which is Italian. All right, I hope that answers your question.
Just to add something, I think an observation was made by a writer, I don't remember who said that by virtue of being global, the English language is no longer the language of the English. I think that's an important point that we need to remember. But more crucially, is this idea, just because we switch to a quote-unquote local native language, for me, doesn't necessarily entail positive transformation. If your understanding of development is the same understanding of development as defined by the Washington Consensus, it makes no difference whether you translate it, entirely into Japanese or Malay or Kikuyu or whatever, because the problem is not the words, the problem is the ideology that comes with it. And for that reason, I am wary. I'm worried about the way in which sometimes the politics of language, like I said, is simply being used to further certain these ends, but actually do not radically change things in any way. A good example would be statues. There are some post-colonial states where all the colonial statues have been completely destroyed. They destroyed all the colonial buildings. But in terms of their developmental paradigm, it's exactly the same. It's the same mode of what Alatas called colonial capitalism. It's just that now they've replaced it with some new buildings. They replaced the old nasty statues with the new statues of their new autocrats. I don't think that registers change in any sense.
Can I ask Amir a quick question? Can I put you on the spot? Oh, you have a voice. Okay, sorry. All right. I just wanted to ask you what inspired you, to write that review. No worries about the voice. Sorry. Any other questions?
I wanted to ask you why you're wearing a hat in the pose.
Yes.
Hello, thanks. Lately, I have seen a few Facebook posts by a historian. His name is Syed. So he criticized Said Hussein. He said that although Said Hussein has been the one who is responsible to tear down the Western myth about the society and all that, but he himself also subjected himself to the other myths, like he liked to use the word spiritual or what he said this is not correct, because you cannot just use spiritual to describe everything is spiritual, because that is referring to specific system of king and rich lord and all that. So this historian said that Said Hussein, although he is to want to overthrow the Western thinking, but he himself also subjected to that. So what is your anyone or two of you can respond? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I have not read the book, so I cannot respond. But from your description, it sounds as if the author has not read The Myth of the Lazy Native properly.
Just very quickly, simple question. How do you oppose something without becoming the thing that you oppose? Right? So this is the trap of dialectics. And it is true of every endeavor and social change. There's always going to be this. Because in order to oppose the thing becomes a constitutive other. I need it because it's the thing I need to oppose. That thing, therefore, is no stranger to me. It's part of it. So we never get away with this. No struggle in human history has gotten away with this. And I think it applies to ideological struggles, cultural struggles, historical struggles, and so it's an ongoing process. Because if you were to take a kind of simplistic view that all I have to do is push this and it's done, it's over, that I think doesn't explain how social change actually happens. History is something that's messy and it moves in different directions at the same time. So there are always going to be these instances where, if you look at the history of, say, the French Revolution, on the one hand wanted to oppose certain forms of social hierarchies, it ends up reproducing other forms of social hierarchies to fill that vacuum. And I think this is just a fact of life. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't struggle, nor does it mean that every struggle is doomed to fail. But I think what we need to be aware of is the fact that the moment we are engaged in struggle, we are engaged in dialectics. And once we engage in dialectics, then there will always be this attentive risk that comes with any attempt to advancing changes in society. That's it. I think it's a Monday. It happens all the time. And I think Syed Alatas himself was certainly aware of this because he's entering the domain that he's contesting. So he's fully aware of the vocabulary, the ideological landscape that he's engaged with at the time.
I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's all the time we have for today. And yes, thank you all of you once again for joining us. Please, a round of applause. And today is your opportunity to get the Life in the Writing at a very special price. And also, if you want to explore Dr. Chandra's writings, yes, please, it's right outside this door. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again here at BUDAYA. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or social media platforms. Thank you.